tells Samuel, he's going to point out to the king that God wants to anoint. Okay, so chapter 9, Samuel anoints Saul. So now Saul was just an ordinary person belonging to the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin was not a big tribe. It was a very small tribe in the clan of the 12 tribes of Judah, of the Israel. And so the only thing good about him, he was very tall. And he stood above all the other Israelites. And God said to Samuel and showed him, he comes. You must have read the story of Saul, how he came looking for his father's donkeys. And God said, he's the one I want you to get to the people as the king. So, we look at verse, when Samuel tells Saul, let's see Saul's response in chapter 9:21. So now Samuel, he comes looking for the donkeys and comes to Samuel the prophet. And Samuel says to Saul that you have been chosen by God. And so, we'll hear what Saul answers.
And Saul answered and said, I am not a Benjamite.
Am I
not a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then do you speak like this to me?
Okay, the first thing that Saul didn't say, wow, great, God has done this to me. He didn't say that. He said, I'm nobody. My clan is my family is nobody. Okay? How can then you say this to me? So God always looks for people. He doesn't look for people who are already qualified, who are highly in high positions. He's always looking for people who are in simple and humble background. The only thing that we know about Saul when he goes for God's election is, see, when you ask for a king, when people are asking for a king, God knows that people would want somebody with a majestic appearance. Okay? And God, first of all, was not pleased that people were asking for a king. But he gave them a king with the kind of presence that they would expect. So, in chapter 10, then Samuel anoints this Saul as a king. But when he comes to anoint him, he calls all the tribe, everybody is there, all the 12 tribes are there, and he says, okay, not this tribe, and he comes to Benjamin, he says, okay, this tribe, and this family, and then now Saul. And they were looking around. Saul is nowhere to be seen. Okay? And they're saying, what happened? What happened to him? Where is he? And to say he's gone, chapter 10, verse 22.
Therefore they inquired the Lord further, has the man come here yet? And the Lord answered, there he is, hidden among the equipment. So they ran and brought him from there. And when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulder upward. And Samuel said to all the people, do you see him, whom the Lord has chosen, that there is no one like him among all the people? So all the people shouted and said, long live the king.
Okay, so that is the only thing that's a description about Saul. Okay, he was taller than all the people. I want you to keep this in your mind, because when we read later about when God elects David, I want to say what is said about David. Okay, Saul, the only description about Saul is tall and well built. Okay, so then now he's made the king. But when he was made the king, in all situations, say 75% of the people said, okay, this is Saul, this is our king. But 25% were not for him. Okay? So now God had to make him gain respect from people's eyes. So God anointing, the Spirit was upon him. And very soon, before Saul could be properly, the coronation of Saul happened, there's a situation where Israel is being invaded by another king, and people are terrified. He's saying, oh, this king has come and he's Ammonites. He said the Ammonites are going to come and he's going to kill us all. So then Saul takes a big army, calls all the people, and he says, no, we are going to, because God's Spirit is upon him, he goes and he defeats these Ammonites. So people are saying, oh, wonderful, oh, king, long live Saul. Saul is defeated. Even those 25% who was not for Saul, now they're following him. But he was able to do again because God's Spirit was upon him, not in his own strength. So when you see in chapter 11, and towards the end, you can see that he is being confirmed as king. Okay, now people have confirmed his king. The people then said to Samuel, who was it that asked, shall Saul reign over us? So the people are saying, who was that who said who didn't accept Saul's reign? Now he said, he's from king. Now everybody joined together and they made him the king. Okay, so now Saul has become the king. And before Samuel fully anoints him, confirms him as king, he gives a farewell speech. In the speech one main thing he says in chapter 12 verse 14. If you fear the Lord and serve and obey him and do not rebel against his commands, and if both you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, that you will be blessed. Okay? So the condition was that you have to listen to the word of God and you need to obey what the king says. And this is a command for the king also, that he also should listen to the voice of God. So now Samuel is given the whole authority to Saul. And now Saul goes for many battles. And every time he goes to the battle, he always asks Samuel to pray for him and find out what's the will of God, and then he goes. So once what happened, the Philistines, they were after 1 year of coming to the reign, there was a situation where he is standing and so many people are coming. The Philistines is a massive army is coming against Israel. He waited 7 days for Samuel to come and pray, do the sacrifice, and then they have to hear from God. God, can you go for this battle or not? 7 days passed and Samuel didn't come because God was testing him, Saul. And Saul said, those days only the priest can give the burnt offering or the offerings, the normal people should not do. But because Saul did not wait for Samuel, he said because people were putting a lot of pressure, he said, okay, the people are going to get very restless, they're going to not listen to me. So he called people and said, let me do the burnt offering. And he did the offering. That was not pleasing in God's eyes. So that was the first mistake he did. And in our lives, if you see, we all set out with good intention. First when God calls us, oh God, I'm just a worm, I'm just a thing, Lord, but you called me, you put me up, now I'm called to do this and that, and you come forward. And after some time, popularity gets to you. You want to be more popular with what the people are saying rather than what God is telling you. And especially for people who are in leadership, it is a big temptation. Because sometimes God will put something in your heart to speak or to say, but then you don't want to offend somebody else. You don't want to step on somebody's toes. So you just want to, you don't listen to what God is saying, and you just go and do, what you feel that, will make you popular. And Saul, just to please the people, and also he was scared. His faith was shaking because he said, oh, if I do not do something quickly, then the Philistines will kill us. He forgot all the time that when God was with him and how God honored him, and it was that God who brought him up to this place. So that was the first time he sinned. And after Samuel comes, Samuel says in chapter 13 verse 11, what have you done? Okay, so verse 13. Can you read verse 13 to 15?
And Samuel said to Saul, you have not done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you.
Now, so Saul is now, God is saying that Samuel tells Saul, because what you have done is displeasing in the eyes of God. So God has chosen a man after his own heart. Okay, so now this time God is choosing not just a tall man, but he's choosing a man after his own heart. And that is, who's that? David. Okay, so the next chapter introduces us to Jonathan. Now Saul's son Jonathan was a very nice young man. He really loved the Lord. He had faith in the Lord. And so in this chapter it shows about when Philistines came to attack Israel, Jonathan because he had he trusted the Lord. He just took with his with one more person. He goes in and you'll read the story in that he helps to defeat Philistines. So there you can actually see his character. Jonathan in chapter 14 verse 6, Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." So he did not think that he needed a big army. He just thought, doesn't matter if God is on our side. Okay, so that was the character of Jonathan. He was a really he trusted the Lord, and so people looked up to him. But it's a sad thing, because of what Saul did, Jonathan could never fall, because God took away the kingdom from Saul's family. Jonathan couldn't go in his footsteps. In the Old Testament times, it was always the father's sins that are taken into, the children also paid for it. But in the New Testament, it's not like that. When the children, if the father sinned, but if we are covered by the blood of Christ. That is why today we are not under any kind of, oh, my ancestors did that, my forefathers did that. But when you come under covering of Christ, that curse does not belong to you. But in the olden times, because of what Saul did, Jonathan couldn't follow to be the king. So after that, people started praising Jonathan, because Jonathan was more respected in the people's eyes. We'll come to chapter 15, where again the Saul does another big mistake, which makes God reject him totally. Okay, when you come in chapter 15, again, now this is he's going to have he's going in a war against the Amalekites. Okay, the Amalekites are another kind of people who are coming to fight with the Israelites. And so God was so merciful. He said, okay, I'll give you the victory, but you need to fully kill everybody, women, children, their ox, anything, destroy them totally. Do not bring their loot, do not bring their wealth, don't bring back anything, no plundering. But you know what Saul did? Because his people said, oh, they killed everything that was of no use, but their nice, good oxen and sheep and all the other stuff, they brought it back. And then, immediately God told Samuel that Saul has again disobeyed me. God expects 100% obedience for his word, especially when we follow him. I mean, today, because we are all new covenant believers, we are in a better place, because we come, there's so much grace for us. But in those days, it was always, God just said, if he gave a commandment, that you followed it. So, and Samuel is so distressed, because you know what? I would be distressed, because God tells Samuel, I regret making Saul as a king. I just want us to think, what would you feel if God said, oh, I regret dying for Adlin, I regret dying for AJ? How would you feel? I mean, if God said that he regrets, because our lives sometimes we do not think what a big price Jesus has paid to bring us to make us children of God. And are we acting in obedience to his word? Are we thinking about what this position means? We all have a calling on our life. It's not just somebody who's a leader that is a calling. Every one of us have a calling in our life. And what are we doing with that calling? Are we obeying God? Are we listening to him? Or are we just making God's heart sad, where he thinks, I regret sending my son Jesus to die on the cross for these unfaithful people? That would really sadden my heart. When I was reading that, I was thinking, God, I hope that I'm not doing anything. Lord, I just repented and I was asking God to forgive and say, God, if there's anything in my life that makes you feel sad, just totally forgive. Please, Lord, just forgive me. And when he said, I regret making Saul as a king, that is a big thing for God to say. Because he took him. And so now Samuel comes to Saul. And one verse he says in chapter 15, verse 22. But Samuel replied, go on, read it.
Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offering and sacrifice, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry, because you have rejected the word of the Lord.
He has rejected you.
He has also rejected you from being king.
Okay, so now God rejects him, and Samuel says to obey is better than sacrifice. This is a key verse that I always think about. To obey is better than us fasting, us giving so much of tithing and everything. All that is needed, but if we do not obey the word of God and just do all the things, going to church regularly, just reading the Bible as a book in the morning, praying, doing all the right things a Christian should do, but not obeying is not pleasing in God's eyes. For in God's eyes, obeying and walking according to the word is more important than all the other things that we bring to him. Okay, so then now God brings David into the story. God first tells now Samuel, I'm going to go to this house, the house of Jesse, and Jesse and you, I will show you who you have to make a king. Now Jesse's got 8 sons. So 8 sons he's got, and 7 of them live with him, and the youngest, David, is a shepherd boy. So Samuel goes there. Imagine, Samuel is a prophet. He knows God very well. But still, he goes there and he sees the 7 boys. First they bring one. He said, I'm sure that is him. That is him, definitely. He looks really good. He's tall. Because in Samuel's head, he's thinking about the characteristic of how Saul was, okay? So the first one he brought, immediately he says, oh, this must be it. They brought the next one. He's thinking, oh, no, okay, no, this must be it. Definitely, God says no. 1, 2, 3, all the 7 of them pass before him. And God says no. And I want us to look at one verse which God says in that 16 verse 7. Chapter 16 verse 7.
But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.
That's the crux of the whole Christian faith. If you want to be pleasing to God, it's your heart that God wants, and it's the heart that's important to him. I always say, people, you can be very religious, you can be very spiritual, the way we worship, the right language we speak when we are in Christian circle, but God knows our heart. We cannot hide, we can't put on a show before God. If he sees everything we say behind closed doors, he sees every nasty thought we have in our head. Even before the thought comes in, before it comes in as a word, he knows it. So how much more careful we should be, because it's not the appearance is important to him. It's what's inside your heart that's important. That's why I always say as Christians, we need to often check our life to see, am I doing this for the right reason? Even if it's a good thing, we must check, is my attitude right? Am I doing it for people, to please people, or am I doing it because this is what Jesus would want me to do? So it's so clear that God looks at the heart. And then Samuel says all the 7 people, and he says, do you have any more sons? And then Jesse says, yes, I have just one more, but he's a shepherd boy. He's just a shepherd boy, he's out in the field. But God had already appointed the shepherd boy to be the king. And we see David. In Psalms, we have a big glimpse of who David was. In those days when he was a shepherd boy, he was just lying in the field, looking up at the sky. And he must have sung, his heart was sold out for God. He just loved God so much. And that is what was so important to God. That is why he chose David. David must, in all his Psalms, it's love songs to God. And he pours out his heart. Every time I read Psalm, I feel there is something that resonates in our life as well. We might be going through something, and when we read, we'll see the way David is saying is something that it's our heart's cry. And when we read Psalm 23, the way he talks about God, so that God, he loved God so much, and that was more. He was not perfect, but he just loved God. and he was just a shepherd boy. So when Samuel asked him to be brought, he comes in, and it says he was a ruddy-looking youth. See, the first king God gave, King Saul, was a real man, tall and well-built, but he is only a youth, okay? But God knew his heart, and God wanted him as a king, and he said, he is the man after my own heart. So the second king, King David, through whom Jesus is the lineage of, Jesus came through, was chosen by God. Okay, and then we see the next chapter says about Samuel, how Samuel anoints David that day. And once he anoints David, and then we hear the next chapter takes us to the David and Goliath, where he goes to fight the big giants. We've heard the story, haven't we? He goes to see his brothers in this army camp, and Saul is still the king, and he goes there and he sees this big giant, and he takes the challenge that Goliath was giving, and he defeats the giant. And he says in chapter 17, we'll read just one verse which just sums up David's faith. Verse 45.
Then David said to Philistine, You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied.
This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I'll give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. That is the faith of David. He did not think that, he's so big. Because what David had, how God had prepared David was, when he was looking after the sheep, he had killed bears and lions with his bare hand, with the help of God. So he knows this is another brute. He's just a wild beast in God's eyes. And how with God's help I can definitely kill him. And that is the faith. So David went, even at that young age, he had that kind of a faith. So he went and killed Goliath. And after that, he became very popular with Saul. Okay, Saul said, who is this person? He's wonderful, and everybody's praising him. So he comes now to Saul's court, and he's taken on board as one of his staff. Okay, and one of the main things that David did was he could beautifully play harp. So every time he played harp, there was so much of peace that Saul felt, because by now Saul was being tormented by some evil spirits, because God's hand had been lifted off from him. And every time he had that, but when David played, it just soothed him. So David became a permanent person in his court. Okay, and then David was very faithful. Whenever he made him a captain, and he said, go fight this battle, and fight this battle, and whenever he did it, he won, because God was with David and gave him victory. But slowly, Saul started becoming jealous of David. Okay, I'll show you one verse when he says in chapter 18, verse 6.
Now it had happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the woman had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul, with tambourines with joy, and with sword, and with musical instruments. So the woman sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s.
Yeah. So that was one word is enough. They said Saul has slain his thousands, but David is 10,000s. That was enough to set the jealousy. So from that time, he started being very jealous. The rest 40 years of his life, he forgot to be the king. His whole mission was to kill David. So he planned, he was very devious, and sometimes in our life, we lose up. He lost totally, it is very sad, Saul totally lost his calling because of his jealousy. And jealousy is such a such a thing that will just, if you are not careful, if you don't nip it at the bud, It'll just consume you, and before you realize, you lose what God has called you into. Today you see so many people, leaders who are being called by God, because their eyes are being taken from God and they're looking at other people around them. They're saying, oh, and they're criticizing others, or they're judging them, or they're just so jealous of the other people's success. They've lost their call because somebody is comparing them and saying, oh, that person is doing better. Their whole focus turns to the other person, and they forget what their calling is. And they lose the blessing that they had. And it can happen to any of us. If we think that if you're looking at somebody else and think that, oh, they're better, they're in a better position, they've got a better job, or they've got a better lifestyle, you lose what God has called you into. God has put a skill, a talent into every one of us individually. It might be, for somebody who's serving the hospital, it might be that you are an encouragement to the patients that you're talking to. And that is a gift, and that is a position where God has given you. And that is no less than somebody who's going around and preaching. Or if you're a teacher, you're teaching children, and that, to be a role model, to teach them. And, whatever position, if you're a mom, that is the greatest position that God has given you. To have a wonderful ministry at home, to be the best you can, to teach your children, to ensure that your children are growing in the word and in the faith. And if you're a father, it's another great mission God has given you, to be the best you can be. You're anointed as the leader of your home. What a privilege. And you need to take that privilege very seriously. You need to know that God has created and called you to be the head of that house, to be the spiritual leader of the house, to be a provider for the house, so it's such a big responsibility God has given. What I'm saying is, if whoever, every one of us, even whether you're in school and college, even you could be young, you have a purpose and you have a calling on your life, and you need to focus your eyes on Jesus and say, God, this is where you put me today, and I will be the best, whatever it is. And when you do that diligently, God will definitely move you to the next place. And from Saul's life, one main thing that you can take away is, just because of his jealousy for David, he lost his whole purpose in life. Next 40 years of his life, he tried to kill David many times. Once when David was playing the harp, he threw his spear, javelin, to kill him. And the whole people, everybody knew that Saul was wanting to kill David. But Jonathan's heart grieved, because Jonathan and David became very good friends. Jonathan, there's a whole series, I think, I don't know whether Abraham spoke on this, about the relationship between Jonathan and David. It's like between Christ and the church. If you really look at Jonathan's life, he was the king's son, the next in line for the throne. And here is David, who's everybody knows that Samuel has anointed him to be the king. Wouldn't you be jealous if you knew that your place was going to be taken by somebody else? But he wasn't. I'll show you one verse where he shows his love for David. Okay, I want to take to chapter 18, verse 3. Let's read actually from the one itself, okay? Let me read it. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow and his belt. So Jonathan literally takes his kingly attire, his princely attire, and gives it to David. What a generous heart. What a heart that he had, that he didn't feel jealous of David. Okay? And he gave his kingly attire to make David, the shepherd boy, the king. If you look in parallel, that's what Christ has done for us. Christ gave the robe of righteousness that he's wearing, and he gave it to us, and he went to the cross. And today, because of what he did on the cross, we are wearing the robe of righteousness that Christ was wearing. So that's why they say there's a lot of relation between Jonathan and David's relationship as Christ and our church. So Jonathan, he was not jealous and he was nothing like his father. But because of Saul's sin, he also killed, he also died at the end because, in the battle along with the father, and he could not be a king. Okay, so now Saul tries to kill David many times. And then he says, okay, I'll get you my first daughter married to you. Go and go and kill so many people in this battle and come. David will go do all that and come back, and he'll say he got the first daughter married to somebody else. Then the second daughter loved David very much. So he says, go and get me 100,000 foreskins of the Philistines. And so David had to go and kill so many men and get the foreskins of them and come and give it to Saul. Can you imagine what kind of a man he was? And he did it so that he was hoping, half the hope that somehow in this battle that David would die. But who was with David? God was with David and gave him victory in everything he did. So when he came to Saul, so Saul only got more jealous and jealous. But one thing about David was, God literally 2 times, he actually passes his enemy camp and he sees Saul vulnerable where he could have killed him. But David did not kill him. He said, I will not touch the God's anointed, the Lord's anointed. And that is something for us to think. I know today we so easily talk about many men of God or women of God. We say, oh, they're like this and I think we should think twice before we judge somebody who God has called to minister. Well, if they're doing something wrong, it's between them and God. We should not open our mouth and judge. I always like the words David said, I shall not touch the God's anointed. We shall not speak about the Lord's anointed. We should not speak about the Lord's anointed. If you know definitely that something is wrong, stay away. If something in a ministry or something you hear is not right, you can keep away from that. Or pray for that person. Because always enemy attacks people who are right in the forefront. So you need to pray for them. But you remember, they're all anointed, the anointed, the men and women of God who have been called by God. We are not there to judge them. So, and that is what pleased God's heart. David said, the vindication is between, he tells to Saul, he says, my Lord. He calls Saul, my Lord, why do you persecute me? Why do you chase me like this? As though I am a flea, as though I am a dog. Why do you chase me like this? What did I do wrong? And both the times he said, I could have killed you, but see, I didn't. At least now do you see that I am not here as your enemy? And Saul feels for a minute. But the next minute again, the jealousy comes out. Being jealous is the worst thing that you can let happen in your heart. If it is even there in a tiny portion, immediately you should squash it. We all get jealous. Nobody will, at some point we envy or we say, oh, they've got that and I don't have. Or, look at them. But when you feel that, immediately pray and say, God, I know that the plan that you have for me is best for my life. And you say, Lord, give me my portion. Give me what is destined for me. Because when we say that, I'm telling you, God will just move you from step to step. He'll be faithful as he was with David. Because David was just a shepherd boy. His family treated him very, they thought he was just nothing. His only qualification was that he loved God very much. And he had a reverential fear for God. And he respected, people who are anointed by God. And then we go on to see then about David's life, but we'll come to see about how finally Saul dies. He comes he started being a king. He was in chapter 8 we come to know him. But I'll just read one more verse from chapter 24, verse 12, where David actually has spared Saul's life, and he says this to Saul. He says, may the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. If you have something against somebody, if you feel somebody has been treated you well, just hand them over to God. As long as it's possible with you, we must live in peace with others. But we don't have to, go and get ourselves into complex situations, but live in peace. And if you think somebody is offending you over and over again, just hand them into God's hand. As David said, let God be the judge. Let God be the judge. And so, God is capable of looking after his children very much when you trust in him. And then finally, Saul goes to this battle. Before that, in chapter, one more incident, very important incident happens. Again, one more despicable thing just Saul did. Let's go to chapter 28. Okay. In those days, there were a lot of witchcraft, as it is now. Okay. People went to witches to ask for what will happen to their lives, or speaking to the dead people. And the witches told them they will call the spirits from the dead and communicate to the people who are alive. And it still happens these days. They're called mediums. The people who did it were called mediums. And Saul, when he first came to be the king, he made sure there was no mediums on, because it was despicable to God. So they killed all the mediums. And now he comes to a situation where he has to go to this battle. And Samuel is dead. He doesn't know, he's listening, waiting to listen from God, but God's spirit has departed from him. He can't hear anything from God. So now he does one thing. He asks everybody, is there any medium in this place? He knows this is not right. He's the one who killed all the mediums. Now he's so desperate, he's saying, is there anybody? Can I go and find a medium? And then he goes and meets this witch of Endor. Okay, he goes to see the witch of Endor. And there she is. And initially she's scared. She says, are you come here to make me get into trouble? You know Saul has killed everybody who was mediums. But Saul says, no. You will not be harmed. Okay. So now I'll read from verse 8. So Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night, he and 2 men went to the women. Consult a spirit for me, he said, and bring up for me the one I name. But the women said to him, surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why have you set a trap for my life to bring about my death? Saul swore to her by the Lord, as surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this. Then the women asked, whom shall I bring up for you? Bring up Samuel, he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. When the women saw Samuel, she knew it was Saul. Okay, so the spirit, and so Saul asked, what can you see? She sees, the woman said, I see spirit coming up out of the ground. What does he look like? He asked. An old man wearing a robe is coming up, she said. Then Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? I'm in great distress, said Saul, and the Philistines are fighting against me. God has turned away from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what to do. Samuel said, why do you consult me, now that the Lord has turned away from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. So Samuel tells him, the spirit of Samuel tells him. This is a big subject of controversy. Many people think, it was somebody who looked like the spirit of Samuel. It is not really Samuel. But clearly the Bible says it was Samuel. And the spirit, because when the witch, she saw, she knew it was Samuel, and she knew this was Saul. But this is something no Christian should do. Saul knew that he should not go to the mediums, but he went because he was so desperate. So again, he failed God. And finally, in the next battle, he gets defeated and he kills himself. He falls, how he dies? He kills himself because he asked his armor bearer to kill him, but he wouldn't kill him. So he put a spear and he falls on it himself and kills him. And in that battle, all his sons get killed. What a sad end to the first king of Israel. The first anointed and chosen king of Israel. we can learn quite a few things from his life. Initially he was scared to, he was so humble. He said, oh me, I am the smallest and I am nobody at all. And just when he came to power, the power got into his head. And he thought he could do things without God's help. And that was the first mistake he did. And then and again he disobeyed. He was more of people pleasing than God pleasing. When people wanted something, he did it rather than, waiting for God's voice. I just want us to think in our life how we can I just want us to think whether we are walking according to the voice of God. The voice of God is not always audible. What we read in the Word, what we follow, are we really listening to it? Are we truly taking the time to fellowship with Him and listening to what He says? Are we following His ways? Or are we doing many times things that we know we don't please people? Because I think that is a very important question we need to ask ourselves. And are we being faithful with the gifts that God has given us? If you're in school or in university or college, your gift is for you to do well and study hard and work at it. If you are working in a profession, then you need to be really diligent in what is given you. I'm really telling you, do not look to somebody else. Just focus on the path that God has set for you. Because the path that He set for you is so unique and different from the path that He's got for somebody else. The minute you take your eyes and look at somebody, you compare yourself to somebody, you're setting yourself up for failure. Maybe for you, things may taking more time than it's happening for others. But when you hang on to God and when you know and trust in Him, like David did, you will, you will be a king in God's eyes, and He will bring you to that position where you will be not just successful in the world's perception, but in God's perception. I think the more and more I'm walking the Christian life, that's what I want to. I'm more concerned about what God thinks about me rather than what people think about me. Because there was a time I was always thinking about, if you do this or if you say this, or now I'm thinking, as long as I'm walking and as long as I feel I have a sense of peace that I'm walking without condemnation in God's eyes, that is what is more important to me, rather than, what people think of me. And I think as Christians, if we focus like that, I really pray that our walk would change like that, and if we are already not doing it, and just our eyes would just fix upon Jesus, who is the author and the finisher of our race. Because He's the one who started our race and He will finish it. He's the one. Today, if we are sitting here, if we know Christ, it's because we were chosen. We have believed the gospel. And we are here as His children. So let's close our eyes. And I want us to spend some time in prayer.